We're driving through Tennessee. I had just moved to Tennessee. We had not been in touch for years. We're talking about years and years. And what are the odds that we text each other in
Yeah.
that moment,
Yeah.
and happen to meet and reconnect, and here we are, right? So
Right. It's really wild.
we're going to start a podcast. It will be historic, biblical, theological. It will be the history of the Bible, the various meanings of it, but per our interpretation, obviously, because it speaks to many people in different ways. I want each one of us to introduce where we're coming from. Like, what does this mean to me versus to him? Why are we even talking about it? What's our background with spirituality or religion or Christianity in this matter, is what we will touch up on the most. But of course, we'll bring in other religions into the mix as well. And hopefully, we will uncover a lot of interesting topics through this conversation. What interested me in this topic, or my upbringing, is I'm Armenian Christian. But growing up, I was very rebellious and very much against organized religion. Even though, which is bizarre, even though Armenians did not actually congregate the way people congregate in the US in churches, and like there's no every Sunday ritual and so on. But either way, I would hear elderly people say something that sounded insane to me, and I would just reject the premise. But at the same time, I did have a lot of spiritual moments where it's really interesting, because I would be constantly confused, like what is happening, right? I would have a spiritual encounter of some sort, let's just call it that, but then my hyper rational mind would kick in, and I would just try to rationalize it, and I would just ignore it, and I kept going, just battling basically between maybe I should believe in God and maybe not. But then for the most of my young years, I was calling myself an atheist, even though I don't think that's really accurate, or has ever been accurate. And I think I still struggle till today to necessarily call myself like religious. I have gotten to a place where I can call myself spiritual, and that spirituality is heavily and almost singularly coming from the Bible, from the Christian faith. But I still do not relate to a lot of the commonly known and practiced ways of Christianity. What made me interested in finally reading the Bible is, one, I got older and slightly wiser, because I just thought, I'm rejecting something I have never read in my life. I am arguing sometimes and saying crazy things like, oh, all the religions are the same, just slight differences and whatever. But in reality, I just really sound stupid because I have not read it to be able to say to make such a claim. So that was one. And two, when the political uproar started happening in the US, for example, in 2015, I think before that I was completely living under the rock when it came to any kind of politics. I was completely oblivious to any of that. But I started seeing some lies and untruths being shared here and there, and I kept becoming that voice on social media, where among my friends, I should say, I don't have a platform, I'm not popular, but I started sharing my opinions and kind of calling out the truth, and people started attacking me, right? Like, just for calling out, like doing research and calling out the truth, like, hey, you're telling me Trump said this, but I can't find that. I'm finding the complete opposite. And people started attacking me for supporting Trump when I didn't even know who Trump was, other than he has buildings in New York City, right?
Mm.
So all of this, of course, boiled over into the 4 years of Trump administration with all the riots and the chaos. And I basically was just observing this entire thing and slowly realizing that even though I identified more with the liberal establishment, in a sense that I thought, yes, I'm pro free speech, I'm pro liberty and progress, right? I slowly got moved into the right, into the more grounded people who oftentimes are religious or they're Christians, they consider themselves Christians, and just start in general noticing that, hey, if the balance is, or the choice is between religious Christians who I've judged many times, or maybe judged is the wrong word. It's just I didn't disliked their ways or their sometimes hypocrisy many times, seem to have their crap together. They seem to be true to their family, more family oriented. They seem overall more kind. And the other side is kicking and throwing tantrums and burning stuff down. And, I'm just like, that was another thing where I'm like, okay, that's good. That's bad. I need to read this book. And then, of course, it's a book that is the most popular book. For as long as we know, that's the most popular book on the planet. Nothing has exceeded that.
Correct.
I have just dabbled in it, but the whole point of the podcast is to actually finally take the time to read and see how that's speaking to me. What is it saying to me? And as we go and debate different sides, and hopefully sometimes we'll take the opposite side, or if he's talking metaphorically, I'll be more literal, if vice versa, we'll just explore different ideas. So, long story short, that combined with history and just seeing inconsistencies with versions and changes, it just got me thinking why there are so many changes. And I think hopefully as we read the Bible, certain things will surface and we can talk about it later. I don't want to get into that topic because that's a whole different historic aspect of things that maybe is not yet time to talk about. Okay, I spoke a lot. And I probably didn't say what I hoped I was going to say in a more coherent way. But now you take it away and tell me what interested you in wanting to read the Bible online, discuss it. And okay, go.
Get into it, yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting. Just, I mean, how you and I both kind of came about this. I mean, I guess just for me, speaking for myself, my personal journey into this was kind of similar to you. I grew up around a lot of Christians, Southern Baptists mostly, or just Southern Christian Protestant. And I grew up with my grandfather used to give me money to remember Bible verses. Like if I remember a Bible verse, he'd give me $1. So I
Oh,
remember
wow.
six Bible
That's very
verses,
interesting.
and I would get $6, $7 here. And he was very, very generous about it. So I did have some incentive to want to like read some of the Bible growing up.
But isn't
Um, and
that
I remember reading, I mean, I remember memorizing, a lot of Ephesians and Romans and mostly New Testament scriptures and some of the Old Testaments like Psalms and, you know, of course everybody probably knows Genesis 1:1 and all these different things, but what I really didn't understand and what I didn't agree with growing up was that whole organized religion part of it, which was not to get too personal about my own life or anything, but we grew up a bit unfortunate financially. I think my family, however, I mean, we were very happy and loving, and we all, you know, still are very close to each other and all this. But financially, we didn't really have a lot, and it caused a lot of stress, more so for my parents than it did for me. But we were going to this church, and we're very fanatical about it. We're going Sunday morning, Sunday evening, and but there were times where we're sitting around the house and the lights would go out, and it's not a breaker. It's definitely not a breaker. uh Someone intentionally shut that off. And but it's interesting though to then go to church and see like the wealth that the pastor has and the youth pastor and the choir director, and to see the imbalance within even this structure and in this organization, like why such the imbalance there. And so then I think that's really kind of, and we got kicked out of a church for having a different opinion about certain scriptures and how they were written. And, if I'm not mistaken, it probably had something to do with speaking in tongues. That's like a big controversial issue, I guess, but amongst Protestants in the South is that, can we speak in tongues or not? And what does that even mean? Which I do
So
have an opinion
you're a better
about.
Christian than the other because you don't speak in tongues.
Right, exactly, exactly. Oh, yeah. And so I really just kind of fell away from it and thought like, okay, this is all very silly, and it's all, and there were a lot of things that I necessarily, there were some of the stories that I always kind of felt were not really meant to be taken literally, even though I feel like a lot of it is taken literally. But that was even at a young age. But anyway, I fell out of religion. I moved to New York, and I just really like kind of was a little bit more like self-serving and not really thinking about spirituality or religion. Then I moved to another country, and I really started to see just how important that spirituality is.
Which country was that?
I went to Cambodia.
Cambodia.
Yep, and I lived there for some years. So, and I just really had an opportunity to be separated from everything that I knew and just start to really seek things for myself. And, I came across all these old writings and ancient writings and just history. And I started to really get interested in the history of it. Like what, like, oh, the history is what makes it so interesting. Like everybody thinks it's probably the most boring part, but no, like once you start seeing like which group of people in which era and which location were these writings being generated out of, and how they've changed throughout the years, and how each thing gets decided and all that stuff. And I just came fascinated with it to a point where I was just like constantly searching for, trying to find the most original exact translations, looking at transliterations, and going back to uh, the Sinai Bible, what's that called? Codex Sinaiticus. That's the oldest, basically, I guess, version of the New Testament that we have. Um, Going back to the Septuagint, but just then finding how things are uncovered and undiscovered, and then also at the same time to watch like, and this is I think what brought you and I onto the same page. Actually, I really do believe that this is exactly where it happens, and I think it is a very very much an important part of our history that I think if we all become a little bit more aware of, we'll start to see a bit more of the truth starting to become uncovered. And that is because you asked me once, like, well, how do you know where you're finding truth? Because there's all these different, different translations, and uh, and different opinions, and just so many different things. And I just said that just you got to follow the persecution, follow the bloodshed. And in Southern Baptist Christians, they would call that the blood of Christ. Like anytime that blood's being shed in the name of Christ would be the blood of Christ. You know, and and I think that's what kind of got you a little bit more interested in it too, because you also could see in history where genocides have occurred strictly based on Christianity, like
Christianity.
Christianity. Yeah, it's really wild. And you start to see like which people are persecuted. And something that I felt within reading and finding and discovering all this was that, you know, um, you kind of always want to try to put yourself in the place of like, if I was God or if I was evil, or, you play these things about like, how do these things exist? But, you know, if I was God, I just couldn't see myself killing someone because they didn't believe like me or think like me, or I don't think that's the way to bring, that's
To
how
bring
you.
people together.
Yeah, yeah, I think that. But anyway, so that's
That's
that's kind of what brought me to this whole thing, was like the history of it really brought me here. Um, and I know that a lot of things that probably we're going to talk about might seem a bit controversial or maybe divisive in some senses, but I really want to use this space to help people to see where their own selves might be lacking in understanding, and that we can all see that we are all a bit flawed in all of this. I guess that's the easiest way to look at it, rather than like, oh, who's right. I don't think I don't
Yeah.
think there's much right as there is as much wrong. but
Yeah.
but I think that if I want to divide anything, it would be to divide the individual self from their self and really try to open up a new perspective for each person and just say, hey, you know what? Let me look into this. Let me, before I make a snap judgment on something, like, let me investigate what's happening here, because, I feel like you and I both have put in quite a bit of investigation going into this and just like really trying to see where it goes. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think a couple of things you said there that's just right on point. When you, and a lot has changed since last time, which I think it's been definitely over a year, maybe possibly two. We've been talking about having this podcast for a while.
It's been over 2 years. Yeah.
It's because,
Yeah.
and a lot has changed since then. I approached you saying, I've never read the Bible. I literally want to start opening it and reading it like raw and see what is it saying to me. But of course, by now I've read quite a bit of it, even though I still, more you read, more you feel like less you know.
Yes, for
So
sure.
so with that, I have obsessed a little bit over the history too, which is, I think that's the big connecting part for us, that I'm also interested in the history. I'm also interested in trying to take what is being said and put it in the timeline of when was that in history, and based on when was that, try to bring historic context to things, right? Because something might make zero sense to you as you read today and with the modern mindset. But then when you think about the ancient person, obviously they had a different worldview and different way of understanding of the truth, or what is true, what are they seeing, how they're interpreting things. So that was very interesting to me. And that bloodshed, a lot of that bloodshed leads to Armenia as the first Christian nation. And as a first Christian nation, it's also interesting. Like I told you, I bought the King James 1611 version,
Mm-hmm.
which is a
Mm-hmm.
massive book. One thing I love about it is at the beginning there's like a zillion pages of just showing the tree of life, the foundation where civilization started from, and then just branching it into every single name like Noah, Shem, Ham, whatever, and then just trickling down the entire biblical races and people and kings and whatever. It's just kind of bringing that down into a visual. And I think that's so important, because this is why in older times, when you read a newspaper, let's say from 1896, I was reading a newspaper from 1896 from the archives, and it was interesting. It was like, and this is where, Armenia appears in the Bible with the same name as before, where Noah planted his first grapes and whatever. And I'm like, I don't read the new version of the Bible and see any of that, right? Like, I don't walk away thinking, oh, wow, okay. The first grape wines were put down by Noah in Armenia, and the ark stopped on Mount Ararat in Armenia. You just don't get that. And then you start wondering, like, why? Why such details have escaped? And I'm Armenian and I'm noticing that. What else is not there that I will never know, right? What else isn't showing up in the Bible, whether it's certain cultures like Armenia? I don't see much about Ethiopians. I think there is some, but there's quite a bit about, of course, Romans and Greeks and Hebrew and Israel, obviously. But there are some cultures that seem to have taken pretty predominant importance in
Mm-hmm.
early Christianity, yet have been left out in modern versions. Like they don't play a part in the same way, which means it will be controversial, not to create divisions, not to create any kind of, not to upset anyone or offend anyone, but just to seek possibilities and truth, which I think by now we know that this is endless. We just seem to never have, we're not going to stumble upon the answer, but it will be a lot of a fun to learn history and go about seeing basically where it takes us. And maybe we'll stumble upon something, right? Maybe we'll come to a terms that's like, I guess it's as simple as just believe Jesus and period, just don't ask questions. That seems to be the best way to live life.
That's it. Check.
Check. That's it. No more podcast needed.
That's it. That's it. That's it. What are we doing here? Oh man.
Do you think we should just have a very clear format, so that we just start reading and going through the text? Because even when I read the first little bit of Genesis, right, between day one of creation and day four, I have a lot of questions,
Yeah.
which means, which means we should probably keep a certain format to make it easy to label our videos for people to try to figure out, like, what are they gonna get into in that
Yeah.
episode,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. I think it would be good for us to start like right at the beginning. I think that's totally fine. There's so much to uncover right there. And you know what's really interesting, is because I find myself so many times that I've been reading through scriptures or reading through history or learning this or learning that, and I find myself going back to the beginning all the time. Like so many times, I go back to the beginning because I'm like, wait a minute, there's something else here. There's something more here,
Yeah.
I mean, and there's so many different understandings of the very first opening of this book, and I think it's definitely worth opening a first episode based around the first six chapters or so would be the furthest we would be able to get probably. Um,
I don't think we will. I don't think we will cover
one chapter.
first six. No, no. I think we might cover one chapter at a time almost. And of
Right.
course, it's not going to be just reading and period. We might literally read a sentence, a verse, then start having a conversation, because if that's triggering any kind of historic context or any kind of political context around us, right? When I look at what's happening today with what Christians easily and very convincingly, is that a word?
Hmm.
Call it the battle between good and evil. I just call it the battle between the globalists and the Republicans or nationalists. Not nationalists in a bad way, but your people who love their nations. But I think even right there, like, we might read something that may trigger political context, and we're gonna have to not ignore that and talk about it. I think this is why, if we can do chapter at a time, cool. But I think we should just have the conversation and keep reading the Bible and talk about the topics as they arise. So I think Genesis is just loaded. There's no way it's gonna be quick.
Yeah, because the book of Genesis also was not written at one moment. Like the whole book of Genesis wasn't written down. It was written across several hundred years, and parts of it are written earlier than later. And
This
I
is
actually
why
had
there's so much confusion in there and contradictions. From my perspective, I see a lot of contradictions. I'm like, wait, you just said that. Why were you saying that?
you should see the names of my files. It's like the timeline, the main timeline. Okay, the real
The main
timeline.
main.
And then I have chronology, chronological list, and then biblical books in chronological order. The Yahwist writings are Genesis 2 and then 4b through 25. That would be the earliest writings in Genesis. So Genesis, actually the very first part of Genesis that's ever written down, starts in chapter 2, verse 4. And you'll see a clear distinctive separation there, between 4a and 4b. So the first part of the verse is connected to the old, and the second part of the verse is connected to the new, or sorry,
Interesting.
to the old, so it's actually reversed. And then also Genesis 15, so the covenant with Abraham, with Abram, later Abraham, where God promises Abram descendants as numerous as the stars. So that would be the other old writing, and then the Elohist, which is second, would be Genesis 20. Huh. There's probably more here. I got to do a little bit more research on that.
I am actually really glad that your grandpa paid you $1 per verse memorization, because you're going to know a lot more about the verses and ability to connect. Because when you're reading for the first time, you do keep coming back to the beginning, but at the same time, there's obviously, I have not read through and through. There's so much where, let's say, something from Genesis connects to Job or to Matthew or whatever, and I need to stop saying whatever. I'm gonna hopefully start speaking more eloquently down the line because I've been in silence for far too long. My speech is just so bad right now. but but I think there's just so many connections that can happen that I might not connect it as quickly. So it will be really fun to have you, who's way more studied in the Bible, to comment. To connect the dots.
And the thing
Yeah.
is that like even the things that I write down, they are truly only my perspective. Usually, I do take from commentators, and I do take from other sources of people who have helped uncover some types of interpretations. But all in all, I try to let just like whatever spirit is inside just
Yeah.
kind of lead me into a specific direction, and therefore it is my own. And
I think
so
that's
I don't care if people
important.
disagree with me or anything. That's totally fine.
I think that's important, and I think it is really important to say a few things about that very thing you just said, right? Just before recording, my father said, "Do you feel like you're ready to talk about this topic? You're well studied enough?" And I said, "If I wait to be well studied on this topic, I will never start." Because that was, I am literally, I've been thinking about this for a decade, but I've been just dancing around this subject of having a podcast for far too long. And every time it was kind of like that, like, am I ready? It's just never going to be ready. You just got to jump in, I think. But another part that you said is it's going to be our interpretation. And that's fine, because I don't think actually the gazillion denominations of Christianity is testament that clearly it speaks to people different ways. And yes, we might agree on things and disagree on some others. And I might interpret something that might offend somebody, but it is just all in search of the truth and how it's speaking to me. And there will be times when I will be harsh. I can't keep my tongue restricted if I have a comment to make, if it's saying something to me that I'm like, wait a minute, and I know it will come. I know it will come. But it is just meant to study and learn, and I don't know where it will take me. But the intentions are coming from a good place, because one, the humility of wanting to study and learn, because I don't know enough, and two, I mean, I might come out super religious after this. Who knows? Or I might remain the same. I mean, I'm so hyperlogical that it's a little bit difficult to imagine. But then, you never know where it's going to take me.
Yeah. What was the defining moment though for me to just say like, hey, I need to focus more on spirituality was literally that. I mean, I did a lot of reading into like Buddhism and stuff like that. It really drastically changed the way I approach
Christianity.
my temple. Yeah, Christianity, how I approach Christianity. Seriously.
Just
Um,
trigger people right off the bat.
yeah. So, and the reason why is because in Buddhism, obviously, they have different names and terminologies for different things that now we have medical terms for. I would say we don't have other religious terms for. They weren't considered to be like a religious terminology, such as like chakras. Like we'll call them nerve
Oh.
centers or whatever. Um, but yeah, I mean, when they talk about the chakras and each part being a specific part of the person, and it travels all the way up, and the crown is the overseer, is is the greater than you, right? Whatever that is, it's greater than you. And I think the further you can step into that, the greater it becomes. Even like in your own mind, we can say, oh, it's greater than me. We can make that like a father figure, like an actual parent, right? Or a teacher. But you can also make that greater than you, into a place of divine nature. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and and I just thought to myself, like, how could I ever consider being the only one responsible for my actions? Like, how could I, who do I answer to, right? Who I can't answer to myself because then I'll just be a mess, right? Like I need something or someone or however you want to call it to answer to. And it really got me thinking like, okay, so if I can hold myself to this higher standard, right? And I think that's where spirituality is really, I think that's the beginning, that's the base of spirituality, is to recognize that there's a higher power, and just really saying like, hey, okay, speak to me directly, show me the way, show me how to live my life. Because when you really sit and think about those things, you know exactly when you say and what you do that's either feels good or feels bad, you know, like, you know, kind of in a way, like, oh, the way I responded to that person was it, maybe it
Not
felt
good.
so good, but oh no, it was probably not good, you know. And so it's like you need that like overseer to be like, hey, you know, you should be watching how you talk. Yeah.
I guess that's the conscious, like your consciousness, right? I think in many places it can have so many different names. Like in Christianity, it can be God, Jesus. When you're thinking about stoicism, then it's just you holding yourself accountable, right? Like making sure that you're truthful to yourself. It's not like you say this one thing to appear good to someone, but then in reality you're flawed. You said something that means that has weight, and you stick to that, you deliver that word, so you're not a hypocrite. And I think that's that's essentially where just so many things just intertwine between religion and spirituality and stoicism. To me, it is very interesting.
Hmm. Yeah, and interesting enough, I think Stoicism is something that is related to even Plato, right? That would be, we could probably Google something like that, right?
ChatGPT.
Is Plato considered Stoicism? Um, do you know what I think that every podcast needs though? You've watched Joe Rogan podcast, right?
Oh, of course.
Everybody needs a Jamie. Like, we need a Jamie in the background, like looking up. Oh, I know.
Uh huh.
So we
Oh
could
my
be
God,
hands
it
free,
is.
you know?
Stoicism is a philosophical school founded in Athens, Greece in 300 BC before Christ by Zeno of Citium.
But is Plato considered Stoicism?
No,
No, right.
Plato was not a Stoic.
Okay. Obviously, because you were giving the time frame, so.
He's the founder of Platoism. What is this Stoicism? I got my own
Yeah,
word.
right. Right. I should have known. Yeah, it's pretty interesting. Yeah, and you know, it's funny because no matter how much, even no matter how many times we look into this stuff and research history ourselves, like, we're still gonna get a lot of the facts and stuff all mixed up, which is
Oh
totally
yeah.
fine. I think we need to try to, yeah, I think accuracy is important, obviously, but I think overall, like, I think there's something so much deeper there.
So yes, and I think I know what you're trying to say, but accuracy is important. However, we're not claiming to be some academics that have studied for 300 years and know everything. So we got to be able to have a conversation, and we're going to make mistakes for sure. And I am absolutely horrific with names, okay? So I think this one episode is getting long that it doesn't need to. So let's end this one here as an introduction, and let's jump into Genesis. Yeah?
Sounds good to me.
Cool.